Hi, I'm Lisa Jablon Fowler, and I'm talking to you from the Family Room, which is a nonprofit organization in Evanston, and it's serving families with children 0 to 4. That we have a baby group and we have some drop-in programs, and you can get our schedule at famroom.org. I am a licensed clinical professional counselor, and I'm a consultant, and I have a private practice, and I've been working in the field of early childhood for 27 years. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about identity, and identity is a very broad and expansive category, and so I'm just going to try and narrow in on a few ideas, a couple of grains of sand from the beach of the subject of identity, because it's a very broad subject. Talk about a few things like from a developmental perspective. I'm not going to talk too much about gender or race or some of the other things that can be related to identity. Just going to try and take a developmental approach. So in the beginning of development, from children up to the age of 18 months old, they're sort of co-regulating with their parents, and they don't have they're kind of symbiotic. They don't have much of a sense of an individual self. It starts to develop around 18 months when a child can look at themselves in the mirror and they can identify, oh, that's just not another baby, that's me. And they can differentiate, and they can tell that they have a sense of I. And then around 3 years old, they have an autobiographical self. They can have an idea of themselves in the story. They start to say, I'm doing this, or I'm going here today. They have a sense of I. Of course, every 2-year-old, everything's mine. And whether you put it down, it's still theirs. Whether you move it across the room, whether someone else is playing with it, everything suddenly is theirs. But that is very specific to our culture. In cultures in Africa or in China or other places where the family or the community is more important, that development of things belonging to me is a little bit different. It's more of a community focus, because you're a person in relationship to community, so your identity from a very early stage is different about objects. So you have this autobiographical self, and then you start to feel very confident about yourself when you're like a preschool toddler. You get to be about 5 years old, and then you want to encourage that confidence. It seems like a little grandiosity. Children, this is when the Superman capes come out, with 4-year-olds, and they feel very clear about I'm all these things, that it's a very creative thing. And so that should be encouraged, not discouraged, because that's something that they're really trying to develop. And they can that's a great time to tell stories about culture, and a great time to tell stories about family and ancestors, because they're building that sense of themselves in relationship to others in community and their roles. And then, I guess, school agers, from the age of 6 to 10, then they start to have a little bit of a peer culture that has shrunk considerably over the last several decades. Certainly not this last generation, but the generation before. Children had a lot more autonomy, and they had more of a peer culture. And now we don't have as much of a peer culture until almost late teen years, because children are always supervised in their activities. And so the disadvantage to not having a peer culture is that now that we have technology and we're putting more things on technology, the non-bullying programs that have been developed, the most successful ones are ones that really help children to understand the effects. If you don't have a peer culture, you can't really empathize with what this means to put something on the internet that will last forever. When we had a peer culture and we didn't have the internet, then things did kind of fade away, rumors faded away, gossip faded away. You kind of reinvent yourself, because identity is always changing throughout the life cycle. So we're organic, it's always developing, we're always adding things and taking things away as we get different roles. So the more social emotional nurturing that we have with children, and less assuming that they have this idea of what effect I will have on someone else when they're so often in front of a screen. They can't read the body language, which is so important, and understanding effects of their behavior. And also for identity, in the 6 to 10-year-olds are beginning to see themselves in comparison to others. So in sports, I'm a good defender on the soccer team, or I'm a good artist, or I'm a good dancer. They start to have this, or I'm a good student in comparison to the group. But it's not quite the same as a peer culture, but they do start to add those layers to their identity. This is also who I am. And generally their sense of self and self-esteem is pretty good until junior high, which, again, gross generalization, just a very a very wide range of development. And then teenage years, of course, there's more peer, the importance of the peers and their feedback. That's a more important aspect of it, influences the your own sense of yourself and your identity. Again, that's a little shakier now than it used to be, because even in team sports, you always have supervised. There's there's a lot of anxiety about giving autonomy. There's the constant leash of the parent with a phone. So it's a little bit different kind of autonomy than it used to be. It's more autonomy in the world and not necessarily the same kind of autonomy. Like, this is who I am in comparison to my peers. There's a little bit of that, but it's still very influenced by the adults and the coaches and teachers, and there's probably still more of that influence in that age than maybe used to be the case when we rely a little bit more on our peers for that. There's a little bit more dependence on adults for that still, for that feedback. Resistance, again, of course, all the typical teenage things. It's not transparent. Face-to-face you would hear a lot of resistance, but then you see that they're trying to integrate that. And without having as much, we're so autonomous in our culture and we want so much individuality, or that's such an important thing right now, or it's such an important thing as part of our culture, that we miss sometimes the cultural piece that's so necessary in establishing your sense of identity. It's harder for us to connect to that, to adhere to it, to have some adhesive, and it's desperately needed. So sometimes, it used to be peer cultures like gangs and stuff like that would be a way to try and gain that, or try to gather that if you don't have it. Not necessarily a positive way. So we're looking for it and rejecting it at the same time as teenagers. We need still parents to do that for us, but we're also rejecting it because the culture says you should be independent and autonomous. You shouldn't be relying on others for this. But there's a desperate need for it, because now you're starting to question values, and now you're starting to think about your brain is developing, and you can look at you can do more reasoning, and you can really challenge things and ask more questions. So in cultures where the ancestors are very important and where the community and the family is very important, while there are a lot of pressures associated with that, it's not as, the ground is more stable in a situation like that. And in this culture, we're having to always try to find a way to help children have that grounding to stand on, and not just feel that it's in the interwave, I'm in the internet, I'm in this like cyber connected place and not really a human connected place. So I could go on and on about this developmentally and all the things that it means. As educators, we want to support children, and there's more of an emphasis now. We still want our children to have a great deal of self-esteem, but it used to be that we thought that the best way to give children self-esteem is to tell them all the time how great they are and all the things that they're doing, and now we know that children who are told all the time how smart they are, how great they are, have great self-esteem, but they don't challenge themselves. They're afraid to try new challenges because they want to not break that image of I'm this smart person. There's lots of research out there to substantiate that, and I won't go into all of that. So we want to encourage children to take the challenge, do the difficult thing, ask them how they feel about it, not project onto it because we're excited that they did something or we think they did something so cute. Ask them how they feel about it, and let them know that the growing of the brain, or growing any of these aspects, social self, it's all a muscle. Just like when we exercise, you have to do that too. You have to exercise that, take risks, and work hard at it, and then you develop a more of a capability for waiting for feedback or delayed gratification, because we're not a society for delayed gratification, and we want to try and build that and encourage that in children. So great people to read. Stanley, Greenspan, Daniel Siegel. I'm trying to think of who others. Those are others, and that they're not necessarily focusing on specifically on identity, but they certainly have volumes and volumes that address developmentally how to help children through different phases and challenges that they have.